Welcome back to another fascinating journey into the hidden mechanisms of ancient power. Today, we're re-exploring one of history's most enduring and least understood forms of control, the extraordinary influence the priests wielded over the mightiest rulers of the ancient world. Picture this. A king sits on a golden throne, commands vast armies, controls the wealth of nations, and holds the power of life and death over millions. Yet when a priest whispers that the gods are displeased, that same king trembles. When religious authorities declare an omen unfavorable, military campaigns are cancelled. When temple hierarchies withdraw their blessing, dynasties crumble. How did men who carried no swords and commanded no legions control those who did? How did priests accumulate wealth that rivaled royal treasuries without owning kingdoms? How did religious authorities position themselves as indispensable intermediaries between heaven and earth, making even the most powerful rulers dependent on their approval? The answers reveal a sophisticated system of psychological, economic, and political control that shaped human civilization for millennia. From the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the pyramids of Egypt, from the temples of Jerusalem to the ritual centers of Mesoamerica, priests stood at the intersection of the divine and mundane worlds. They didn't just perform rituals, they controlled access to legitimacy itself. They didn't merely interpret omens, they determined what counted as divine will. They didn't simply advise kings, they made and unmade dynasties. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's most powerful and enduring institutions, the priesthood as political force. This is the story of how ancient priests controlled kings and empires, wielding power that outlasted armies and treasures, power that shaped civilizations in ways still felt today. Chapter 1. Mesopotamia's Temple Economy. The story of priestly power begins in the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, where the world's first cities rise from the alluvial plains of the Tigris and Euphrates. Around 3500 BCE, Uruk emerges as humanity's first true urban center, home to perhaps 50,000 people, an unprecedented concentration of humanity. At Uruk's heart stands not a palace but a temple, the great sanctuary dedicated to Inanna, goddess of love and war. This architectural choice is not accidental. In humanity's first experiment with urban civilization, priests arrive at power before kings. The early Sumerian city-states are theocracies in the truest sense. The city belongs to its patron deity, and the temple functions as that god's household. The An or Ensi titles, usually translated as priest-king, serves as the deity's earthly steward, managing divine property on behalf of an immortal landlord. This theological framework has profound political implications. The ruler governs not by personal right, but as the god's representative. Authority flows from heaven through the priesthood, and those who control access to the divine control access to legitimacy itself. The temples of early Mesopotamia are not merely religious centers but economic powerhouses that dwarf any other institution. The Temple of Inanna at Uruk controls vast agricultural estates worked by thousands of laborers. Temple records, preserved on clay tablets, reveal an institution managing grain production, textile manufacture, livestock breeding, and long-distance trade. The priests developed cuneiform writing not to record prayers, but to track economic transactions: how much grain stored, how many sheep sheared, which workers received rations. Writing itself, humanity's most revolutionary technology, emerges as a tool of priestly economic administration. The temple economy operates through a system of corvée labor and ritual obligation. Farmers dedicate a portion of their harvest to the temple as offerings to the gods. Craftsmen provide manufactured goods. Laborers perform maintenance on irrigation systems that the temple controls. In return, the temple provides security, storage facilities, and redistribution during shortages. It's a system that makes everyone economically dependent on the temple, and by extension, on the priests who manage it. The priests don't need to threaten violence. Economic survival requires cooperation. But priestly power extends far beyond economics into the realm of knowledge monopoly. In a world where literacy is rare and difficult to acquire, priests control the technology of writing. Only they can read the omens scratched on oracle bones. Only they understand the complex mathematics required for astronomy and calendar keeping. Only they possess the medical knowledge to treat diseases. This knowledge monopoly makes priests indispensable advisors to any secular authority. A king might command armies, but he needs priests to tell him when the stars favor battle, whether the gods approve his decisions, how to appease divine anger. The relationship between kings and priests in early Mesopotamia is complex and evolving. Initially, secular rulers emerge as war leaders, the lugal, or big man, who commands troops during conflicts with rival cities. These military commanders gradually accumulate permanent authority, establishing dynasties and building palaces separate from temples. But they cannot simply discard priestly authority. They need religious legitimation to transform military power into accepted rule. They need priests to perform the rituals that connect them to divine favor. The sacred marriage ritual exemplifies how priests maintain control even as secular kingship emerges. Each year at the New Year festival, the king must ritually marry Inanna, represented by the high priestess. This ceremony, performed in the temple's highest chamber, symbolically renews the king's connection to divine power and ensures fertility for the coming year. The king's legitimacy literally depends on this annual ritual. If priests refuse to perform it or declare it invalid, the theological foundation of kingship collapses. Kings attempt to co-opt priestly power by assuming religious roles themselves. Sumerian and Akkadian rulers take titles like Beloved of Inanna or Chosen of Enlil, claiming direct divine favor. They build new temples and endow existing ones with lavish gifts, buying priestly support. They appoint relatives to high religious positions, trying to control the priesthood from within. Some, like the Akkadian ruler Naram-Sin around 2250 BCE, go further, declaring themselves divine and demanding worship. But such moves provoke resistance. The priesthood has centuries of institutional continuity, ideological legitimacy, and economic resources. Individual kings are mortal. The priesthood is eternal. The priests develop sophisticated techniques for maintaining influence. They control the calendar, determining when festivals occur and when agricultural work begins. They interpret omens from animal entrails, oil patterns on water, celestial movements, divination systems so complex that only trained specialists can perform them. When a king plans a military campaign, he must first consult the priests to determine if omens are favorable. If priests declare the omens bad, the campaign is postponed or canceled. This gives priests veto power over royal policy without directly challenging royal authority. The economic records from temples reveal another control mechanism: loans. Temples function as ancient banks, lending grain, silver, and goods at interest. Kings themselves borrow from temples to finance wars or construction projects. Debt creates dependency. A ruler indebted to the temple must maintain good relations with the priesthood or risk having loans called in at inopportune moments. The priests don't need to threaten. The economic leverage speaks for itself. Yet we must avoid portraying ancient priests as cynical manipulators. Many genuinely believe in their religious systems. They see themselves as serving the gods, maintaining cosmic order, and protecting society from divine anger. Their power stems partly from sincere conviction that makes their claims credible. When priests warn that the gods are angry, they believe it. This genuine faith makes them more effective political actors than pure cynics would be. By 2000 BCE, the pattern is established. Mesopotamian civilization rests on a dual system where kings provide military, leadership, and day-to-day governance, while priests control access to divine legitimacy, manage massive economic resources through temple institutions, maintain knowledge monopolies, and perform rituals that kingship requires. Neither institution can function without the other, but the balance of power constantly shifts depending on individual personalities, economic conditions, and military circumstances. This model, developed in Mesopotamia's city-states, will influence civilizations throughout the ancient world, establishing patterns of priest-king relations that persist for millennia. Chapter 2. The Egyptian Paradox. Ancient Egypt presents history's most intriguing paradox of priestly power. The pharaoh is not merely chosen by gods, but is himself divine, the living incarnation of Horus, son of the supreme god Ra. Pharaoh owns all Egypt, every field, every animal, every person exists as his property. He commands absolute authority, with no constitutional limits, no competing institutions, no theoretical checks on his power. Yet this god-king, this absolute monarch, remains profoundly dependent on the very priesthood that proclaims his divinity. The priests who create the theology of divine kingship also control access to that divinity, and control becomes power. The construction of this system begins in Egypt's archaic period, around 3100 BCE, when Upper and Lower Egypt unite under a single ruler. The early pharaohs established their legitimacy through elaborate religious frameworks developed by priestly intellectuals. The king is Horus in life and becomes Osiris in death. He's son of Ra, maintaining cosmic order through his rule. This isn't mere propaganda, but a sophisticated theological system that makes Pharaoh the linchpin holding the universe together. If Pharaoh fails, chaos returns. The Nile might not flood, crops might fail, enemies might invade. The king's ritual performance becomes essential to cosmic stability. This creates priesthood's opportunity. If Pharaoh maintains cosmic order through ritual, then those who know the rituals control the mechanism of order itself. The priests become indispensable technical specialists in the maintenance of reality. They know the proper prayers, the correct offerings, the right times for ceremonies. They understand the complex mythology that explains how the world functions. Pharaoh might be divine, but he needs priests to tell him how to be divine correctly. The economic foundation of priestly power in Egypt rivals and eventually exceeds Mesopotamian temples. The great temples, Karnak, Luxor, Memphis, Heliopolis function as massive economic enterprises. The Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak alone employs 81,000 people at its height, controlling approximately 1/3 of Egypt's cultivated land and 90% of its ships. These aren't just religious institutions, but economic conglomerates managing agriculture, manufacturing, mining, trade, and finance. The high priest of Amun commands resources that make him second only to Pharaoh in wealth, and sometimes superior. Temple lands are theoretically royal gifts, granted by Pharaoh to honor the gods. But in practice, temple estates accumulate across generations, compounding through additional royal donations, bequests from nobles, and income from their own economic activities. Temples are tax-exempt, so their wealth grows faster than pharaohs. By the New Kingdom period, 1550 to 1077 BCE, the priesthood of Amun has become so wealthy and powerful that high priests function as kingmakers, their approval essential for legitimate rule. The daily temple ritual demonstrates how religious ceremony translates into political control. Each morning, before dawn, the high priest enters the sanctuary's innermost chamber where the god's statue resides. He awakens the deity, bathes and dresses the statue, offers food and drink, performs prayers, and seals the sanctuary. This ritual, repeated daily at every major temple, maintains cosmic order. If it's not performed correctly, mat collapses and chaos returns. Pharaoh is supposedly responsible for these rituals, but obviously cannot personally perform them at every temple. He delegates to priests, making them his representatives in maintaining cosmic order. But delegation creates dependency. If priests refuse to perform the rituals or perform them incorrectly, Pharaoh's cosmic function, his entire justification for rule fails. The priests develop elaborate purity requirements that further entrench their position. Only the ritually pure can approach the gods, and purity requires specific knowledge and procedures. Priests must shave their entire bodies, wear only linen, avoid certain foods, undergo purification ceremonies. These requirements seem like religious scrupulousness, but they function as professional barriers to entry. Not just anyone can perform the crucial rituals. Only trained, initiated priests possess the knowledge and purity status required. This creates a closed professional class that controls access to divine power. Pharaohs attempt various strategies to manage priestly power. They appoint relatives to high religious positions, trying to ensure loyalty. They create new religious offices with themselves as sole occupants, developing royal cults that bypass traditional priesthoods. They commission building projects that nominally honor the gods, but actually demonstrate royal power and create architectural propaganda. Some pharaohs, like Thutmose III, 1479 to 1425 BCE, campaign aggressively to subordinate priestly authority to royal will, confiscating temple lands and reducing priestly incomes. Then comes history's most dramatic attempt to break priestly power, the Revolution of Akhenaten. Around 1353 BCE, Pharaoh Amenhotep IV ascends the throne and within 5 years launches a religious revolution unprecedented in ancient history. He changes his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and declares that all traditional gods are false. Only the Aten, the sun disk, is real. He closes the temples of Amun and other traditional deities, confiscates their vast estates, dismisses their priesthoods, and even orders their names chiseled from monuments. He builds a new capital, Akhenaten, modern Amarna, dedicated solely to Aten worship. Akhenaten's revolution appears to be about theology, but it's fundamentally about power. The traditional priesthoods, especially of Amun, have grown so wealthy and influential that they rival Pharaoh himself. By declaring their gods false and confiscating their property, Akhenaten attempts to destroy the institutional base of priestly power. He makes himself the sole intermediary between humanity and the divine, no priest needed. It's the most radical assault on priestly authority in ancient history. The revolution fails spectacularly. Akhenaten dies after 17 years of rule, and within 3 years the traditional priesthoods are restored. His son and successor, initially named Tutankhaten, changes his name to Tutankhamun, rejecting the Aten and embracing Amun. The priesthood of Amun, restored to power and hungry for revenge, erases Akhenaten from history. His name is struck from king lists, his capital demolished, his monuments destroyed. The priests demonstrate what happens to pharaohs who challenge their power too directly. The lesson shapes subsequent Egyptian history. Later pharaohs learned to work with rather than against priestly power. Ramesses II, 1279 to 1213 BCE, Egypt's most successful new kingdom pharaoh, builds lavishly for the temples, endows priesthoods with generous gifts, and involves them intimately in his government. He understands that priestly support makes kingship more secure, not less. His long reign and successful transmission of power to his heir demonstrate the wisdom of accommodation. By the Third Intermediate Period, 1077 to 664 BCE, the balance shifts decisively toward priestly power. The high priest of Amun at Thebes becomes so powerful they essentially rule southern Egypt as independent monarchs, while nominal pharaohs govern from the north. A high priest named Herihor even takes royal titles and has himself depicted in pharaonic regalia. The priests who once proclaimed Pharaoh's divinity now claim divinity for themselves. The system has come full circle. The Egyptian case teaches crucial lessons about priestly power. First, even theoretically absolute monarchs depend on religious legitimation. Second, control over ritual means control over legitimacy. Third, economic power accumulated through temple institutions provides independent resources that make priesthoods difficult to subordinate. Fourth, knowledge monopolies in Egypt's case. The complex mythology and ritual knowledge required to maintain Maat create professional dependencies that translate into political influence. Finally, direct assaults on priestly power tend to fail while accommodation succeeds. These patterns recur across ancient civilizations, making Egypt not an exception but the paradigmatic case of how priests control even the mightiest rulers. Chapter 3. Priestly Power in Ancient Israel. The biblical lands of ancient Israel and Judah present a unique variant of priestly power, one where religious authorities speak not for established temple institutions, but as independent prophets claiming direct divine inspiration. Here we see priestly power in its most volatile and dramatic form, not the bureaucratic control of Mesopotamian temples or the institutional dominance of Egyptian priesthoods, but individual holy men confronting kings with messages they claim come directly from God. These confrontations produce some of ancient history as most dramatic moments and reveal how spiritual authority can challenge political power even without institutional backing. The pattern emerges early in Israelite history with the prophet Samuel, who functions as judge, priest, and kingmaker around 1050 BC. When the Israelite tribes demand a king to lead them like other nations, Samuel initially resists, warning them that kings will conscript their sons, confiscate their property, and impose heavy taxation. But God commands Samuel to anoint a king, and he chooses Saul, a warrior from the tribe of Benjamin. The anointing ceremony itself establishes the crucial principle: kings rule by divine selection mediated through prophetic authority. Saul doesn't seize power through military conquest or inherit it through lineage. He receives it from God through Samuel's prophetic act. This creates immediate tension. Saul possesses military power and popular support, but Samuel controls his legitimacy. When Saul disobeys Samuel's instructions during a military campaign offering sacrifice himself rather than waiting for Samuel, then sparing an enemy king Samuel wanted executed, the prophet declares that God has rejected Saul as king. Samuel secretly anoints David, a shepherd boy from Bethlehem, as Saul's replacement. Saul remains militarily powerful and retains his throne for years, but Samuel has withdrawn divine legitimation. The theological foundation of Saul's kingship has cracked. When Saul finally dies in battle, David's succession is inevitable. The prophet's word proves more powerful than the king's sword. David and his son Solomon manage priestly power through co-optation. David brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, making his new capital the religious center of Israel. Solomon builds the first temple, creating a magnificent institutional focus for Israelite religion directly under royal control. Both kings maintain court prophets, religious advisors who provide divine guidance while remaining dependent on royal patronage. It's the standard ancient Near Eastern model of managed church-state relations. But this managed system breaks down after Solomon's death in 930 BCE, when the kingdom splits into northern Israel and southern Judah. The northern kingdom establishes alternative worship sites to prevent its people from traveling to Jerusalem for festivals, and religious authority fractures. Into this fractured landscape emerge the independent prophets Elijah, Elisha, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Jeremiah, who claim to speak for God regardless of royal approval. The prophet Elijah's confrontation with King Ahab and Queen Jezebel around 870 BCE exemplifies this new dynamic. Ahab, king of northern Israel, marries Jezebel, a Phoenician princess who brings worship of the god Baal into Israel. Jezebel, acting with Ahab's support, promotes Baal worship and kills Israelite prophets who resist. Elijah appears before Ahab and declares a drought as divine punishment for abandoning Israel's God. For 3 years, no rain falls. Elijah then stages a dramatic showdown on Mount Carmel, challenging 450 prophets of Baal to a contest. The Baal prophets call on their god to consume their sacrifice with fire. Nothing happens. Elijah calls on Israel's God, and fire descends from heaven, consuming his sacrifice. Elijah then orders the execution of all Baal prophets. Rain returns. What's remarkable here is that Elijah possesses no institutional power. He has no temple, no priesthood, no official position. He cannot raise armies or collect taxes. Yet he challenges royal authority directly and wins. How? By claiming direct divine inspiration that trumps all human authority, and by performing miraculous demonstrations that validate his claims. When Ahab and Jezebel try to kill Elijah, he survives and continues prophesying against them. His spiritual authority proves impossible to eliminate through conventional political means. Elijah's successor, Elisha, goes even further. He actively conspires to overthrow Ahab's dynasty, anointing a military commander named Jehu as king and encouraging him to commit regicide. Jehu murders King Joram, Ahab's son, executes Queen Jezebel, and systematically slaughters Ahab's entire family and all Baal worshippers in Israel. It's a religiously motivated coup executed with extraordinary violence. A prophet has not merely criticized the king but orchestrated dynastic destruction. The political implications are staggering. Prophetic authority can legitimately override hereditary succession if the prophet deems the king insufficiently faithful to God. This creates chronic instability in the northern kingdom. Between 930 and 722 BCE, Israel experiences 19 kings from 9 different dynasties. Many come to power through assassination and coup, often with prophetic blessing. Religious authority and political authority remain in constant tension, with prophets serving as wildcard forces that can destabilize or legitimize regimes based on their assessment of royal piety. The southern kingdom of Judah, where Davidic dynasty maintains continuous rule, fares somewhat better, but even here prophets challenge royal authority. Isaiah confronts King Ahaz about foreign policy, opposing alliances with Assyria. Jeremiah spends his career warning King Jehoiakim and subsequent rulers that their policies will lead to Babylonian conquest. Both prophets face imprisonment and death threats, but both continue prophesying. Their persistence demonstrates that prophetic authority, even when institutionally unsupported, possesses moral force that makes silencing it difficult and politically costly. The prophets develop several techniques for maintaining influence despite lack of institutional backing. First, they claim direct divine communication that requires no institutional mediation. This makes them independent of temple priesthoods and royal control. Second, they perform dramatic symbolic actions that capture public attention. Isaiah walks naked for 3 years as prophecy against Egypt. Jeremiah smashes pottery in public to symbolize Judah's coming destruction. Ezekiel performs elaborate street theater. These actions, often considered crazy by contemporaries, create memorable prophecies that stick in public consciousness. Third, they position themselves as guardians of covenant tradition, claiming to represent authentic Israelite religion against royal innovations or compromises. This gives them ideological high ground. Most importantly, the prophets succeed or fail based on whether their prophecies come true. When Jeremiah predicts Babylonian conquest, and Babylon does indeed destroy Jerusalem in 586 BCE, his authority is vindicated posthumously. The test of prophetic authority is accuracy, and successful predictions, even of national catastrophe, prove divine inspiration. This creates powerful incentive for rulers to take prophetic warnings seriously. A king who ignores prophetic counsel risks not just divine anger, but the practical consequences if the prophecy proves accurate. The exile in Babylon, 586 to 538 BCE, transforms prophetic authority. With no temple, no monarchy, and no land, Israelite identity survives primarily through texts and teaching. the realm where prophets and priests excel. When exiles return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, the religious authorities have unprecedented power. Ezra the scribe and Nehemiah the governor function as religious leaders whose authority rivals and often exceeds political authority. The post-exilic Jewish community becomes essentially a theocracy, with religious law, Torah, serving as constitution and priests as primary authorities. The biblical prophets demonstrate that priestly power doesn't require institutional wealth or bureaucratic structures to challenge political authority effectively. Personal charisma, claims of divine inspiration, dramatic demonstrations, and ideological positioning as defenders of tradition can provide sufficient authority to confront kings. The price is instability. Prophetic authority without institutional constraints tends to produce political volatility. But it also shows that spiritual authority possesses independent power that cannot be fully subordinated to political control. Kings may command armies, but prophets who successfully claim to speak for God command consciences. And in the long run, conscience shapes history as powerfully as force. Chapter 4. Delphi's sacred monopoly on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece stands a sanctuary that for nearly 1,000 years wields more political influence than any Greek city-state. The Oracle of Delphi, the sanctuary of Apollo, where priestesses speak prophecies in trance-like states, becomes ancient Greece's most important political institution. Kings and city-states from across the Mediterranean consult the oracle before making major decisions. Colonization expeditions seek its approval. Wars begin or are averted based on its pronouncements. How does a single religious site, controlled by a relatively small group of priests, accumulate such extraordinary influence over Greek civilization? The answer reveals how priests can monopolize spiritual authority and translate it into political control. The oracle's origins blend myth and history. Legend claims that Apollo killed the python, a serpent that guarded the site, and established his sanctuary there. The historical reality is that by at least the 8th century BCE, the sanctuary at Delphi is functioning as an oracle, with priestesses called Pythias delivering prophecies to suppliants. The oracle's method is distinctive and theatrical. The Pythia, a woman selected from local families, undergoes purification rituals, then descends into the temple's inner chamber, the Akhenaten. There, seated on a tripod over a chasm that supposedly emits prophetic vapors, she enters a trance state and speaks prophecies, often in cryptic or ambiguous language the priests then interpret and deliver to suppliants. Modern archaeology suggests the trance might have physical causes. Geological faults beneath the temple might have released ethylene gas, a sweet-smelling substance that in small doses produces euphoric dissociation. Whether divine inspiration, gas inhalation, or theatrical performance, the effect is the same. The Pythia speaks with Apollo's voice, and her words carry divine authority. The priests of Apollo control access to this authority, managing who can consult the oracle, and consultations occur, and how ambiguous prophecies are interpreted. The oracle's influence expands dramatically during Greece's colonization period, 750 to 550 BCE. As Greek city-states send out colonists to establish new settlements around the Mediterranean and Black Sea, they routinely consult Delphi about where to settle and which gods to honor at the new location. The oracle's approval becomes essential for legitimate colonization. This gives Delphi enormous influence over Greek expansion. The priests of Apollo develop extensive geographic knowledge through these consultations, learning about distant lands, resources, and opportunities. They become information brokers, guiding Greek colonization patterns and ensuring that new colonies maintain ties to Delphi. Delphi's political power peaks during the Archaic and Classical periods, 600 to 300 BCE. City-states consult the oracle about constitutional reforms, military campaigns, religious matters, and diplomatic disputes. The oracle's pronouncements carry such weight that they can determine policy. When Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia, contemplates war with Persia around 547 BCE, he sends lavish gifts to Delphi and consults the oracle. The Pythia declares, if Croesus crosses the Halys River, he will destroy a great empire. Encouraged, Croesus invades Persian territory. He's defeated and captured, his own empire destroyed. The prophecy was technically accurate. He did destroy a great empire, just his own rather than Persia's. Delphi's reputation for infallibility is maintained through such clever ambiguity. The priests develop sophisticated techniques for managing their prophetic monopoly. First, they schedule consultations carefully, limiting access to create scarcity and importance. The Pythia delivers prophecies only on the 7th day of 10 months per year, and then only to a limited number of suppliants. This exclusivity enhances value. Second, they charge fees that vary by the supplicant's wealth and status. Major powers pay substantially more than individuals, generating significant revenue. Third, they accept elaborate gifts, precious metals, statues, dedications, buildings that accumulate to make Delphi wealthy beyond any ordinary Greek sanctuary. The treasuries of various city-states, constructed at Delphi to house their offerings, still stand as archaeological testament to this wealth. Most importantly, the priests master the art of strategic ambiguity. Oracle responses are often open to multiple interpretations, allowing the priests to claim accuracy regardless of outcomes. When Athens consults the oracle about how to defeat the invading Persian fleet in 480 BCE, the Pythia speaks of wooden walls providing salvation. Some interpret this as city fortifications. The general Themistocles argues it means Athens' wooden warships. Themistocles' interpretation wins. Athens evacuates the city and defeats Persia at the naval battle of Salamis, and Delphi's reputation is enhanced. Had Athens lost, the prophecy could have been reinterpreted to mean something else entirely. The oracle also develops a reputation for refusing to answer certain questions or declaring that gods will not intervene in particular matters. This strategic refusal to engage prevents the oracle from being pinned down on questions where any answer might prove incorrect. When awkward questions arise, or when political situations are so complex that any prophecy might anger powerful parties, the priests can simply declare the matter beyond Apollo's willingness to address. This flexibility prevents the oracle from being trapped by its own pronouncements. Delphi's priests also position themselves as promoters of pan-Hellenic unity and arbiters of inter-Greek disputes. They establish the Pythian Games, athletic competitions second only to the Olympic Games in prestige. They promote the concept of a shared Greek identity, transcending individual city-state loyalties. They position Delphi as neutral ground where Greek states can negotiate and seek mediation. This political neutrality, or at least the appearance of it, makes Delphi acceptable to all parties and enhances its role as arbiter. Yet Delphi's influence depends ultimately on belief. When people stop believing the Pythia speaks for Apollo, or when political powers choose to ignore oracular pronouncements, Delphi's authority collapses. This begins happening in the Hellenistic period after Alexander the Great. When Alexander visits Delphi in 336 BC is seeking oracular approval for his Persian campaign, the Pythia initially refuses to prophesy, claiming it's not the appropriate day. Alexander drags her toward the temple by force. She exclaims, "You are invincible." Alexander takes this as his prophecy and departs satisfied. But the incident reveals that by the late 4th century BCE, even the sacred oracle can be physically coerced by sufficiently powerful rulers. As Greek city-states lose independence to Macedonian and later Roman power, Delphi's political relevance diminishes. When decisions are made by distant kings rather than democratic assemblies, oracular consultation becomes less important. The oracle continues functioning into the Roman period, but it's increasingly a tourist attraction rather than political necessity. The Roman Emperor Nero supposedly robs Delphi of 500 bronze statues during his Greek tour in 67 CE, treating the sanctuary as museum rather than living religious institution. The oracle's final decline comes with Christianity. Christian emperors view pagan oracles as demonic deception, and they actively suppress them. The oracle allegedly falls silent when Julian the Apostate, the last pagan emperor, consulted in 362 CE. The final recorded prophecy reportedly states, "Tell the king the pharaoh hall has fallen to the ground. Apollo has no longer a cell, or a prophetic laurel, or a speaking fountain. The speaking water is quenched." Whether this prophecy is authentic or Christian invention, it marks the end. By 390 CE, Emperor Theodosius orders closure of all pagan oracles. Delphi's priests are dispersed. The sanctuary falls into ruin, and Apollo's voice goes silent after 1,000 years. Delphi's millennium of influence teaches crucial lessons about priestly power. First, controlling access to perceived divine communication creates political influence disproportionate to institutional size. Delphi was never militarily powerful, economically dominant in the way of Egyptian temples, or legally authoritative. Yet it shaped Greek history for centuries through its monopoly on one service: divine guidance. Second, strategic ambiguity in prophecies protects priestly authority from falsification. Vague or multi-interpretable predictions maintain reputation regardless of outcomes. Third, positioning religious authorities as neutral arbiters enhances political influence. Delphi's claim to stand above Greek political divisions made it useful to all parties. Finally, priestly power ultimately depends on belief. When people stop believing priests speak for gods, priestly authority evaporates regardless of institutional strength. Chapter 5. The Magi who made Persian emperors. In the vast Persian Empire that dominated the ancient Near East from 550 BCE to 330 BCE, a priestly class called the Magi wields influence so profound that no Persian king can rule without their approval. These Zoroastrian priests control religious rituals, interpret dreams and omens, educate princes, and determine who is fit to rule. They are kingmakers in the most literal sense, and their power illustrates how priests can dominate even the mightiest empires when they control the mechanisms of legitimacy. The Magi demonstrate that in a sacred monarchy, those who control sacred knowledge control the throne itself. The Magi emerged from the Median peoples of northwestern Iran, originally functioning as a priestly tribe among the Medes. When Cyrus the Great establishes the Persian Empire by conquering Media in 550 BCE, he inherits the Magi as the empire's religious specialists. Cyrus is pragmatic about religion, tolerating diverse faiths throughout his empire while promoting Zoroastrianism as the royal cult. The Magi, as Zoroastrian specialists, become essential to royal legitimacy under Cyrus and subsequent Achaemenid rulers. Zoroastrianism provides theological framework perfect for priestly power. The religion's founder, Zoroaster, preached of a cosmic struggle between Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of truth and light, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of lies and darkness. Humans must choose sides in this cosmic battle, and kings bear special responsibility to uphold truth, Asha, and fight the lie, Druj. This theology makes royal legitimacy dependent on religious correctness. A king isn't just a powerful warlord, but a champion of cosmic order who must rule according to religious principles to maintain divine favor. Who determines whether a king upholds truth? The Magi, as religious experts and interpreters of divine will. The Magi developed several mechanisms for controlling Persian kingship. Retry A continue first. They control education of royal princes. Young men of the Achaemenid royal family are raised under Magi instruction, learning Zoroastrian theology, Persian history, proper ritual practice, and the ethical requirements of kingship. This educational monopoly allows Magi to shape future rulers' worldviews, instilling in them from childhood the belief that divine favor depends on priestly approval. By the time a prince ascends to the throne, he has internalized a framework that makes Magi indispensable. Second, the Magi control the coronation ritual. A Persian king cannot legitimately rule without proper investiture ceremonies performed by Magi at sacred sites. The coronation involves complex rituals connecting the new king to Ahura Mazda and to the line of legitimate Persian rulers. The Magi's refusal to perform these ceremonies, or their performance in ways that question the king's legitimacy, can undermine a ruler before his reign even begins. This gives them veto power over succession. Third, the Magi maintain monopoly over interpretation of royal dreams and omens. In Persian culture, dreams are understood as divine communication, particularly for rulers whose decisions affect millions. Kings routinely consult Magi to interpret their dreams and determine whether omens favor military campaigns, policy decisions, or administrative appointments. This interpretive authority gives Magi subtle but profound influence over royal decision-making. A king who consistently ignores Magi interpretations risks being seen as rejecting divine guidance. The most dramatic demonstration of Magi power occurs in 522 BCE, following the death of Cyrus's son Cambyses II. Cambyses dies in Syria while returning from his Egyptian campaign, leaving no clear heir. According to the account preserved by the Greek historian Herodotus and corroborated by Darius, his own inscriptions, a magus named Gomata, called the false Smartes in Greek sources, seizes the throne by impersonating Cambyses' brother Bardia, who had been secretly killed. For 7 months, this magus rules the Persian Empire, the only non-Achaemenid ever to sit on the Persian throne. Gomata's brief reign is revolutionary. He cancels taxes for 3 years, abolishes military conscription, and according to hostile sources, attempts to shift religious authority decisively toward the Magi at the expense of traditional Persian nobility. Whether these reforms represent genuine religious conviction or political calculation to build a Magi power base, they demonstrate how thoroughly priests have penetrated the imperial system. A single magus, through religious authority and knowledge of court rituals, can plausibly claim the throne of history's largest empire. Gomata's reign ends when 7 Persian nobles, led by Darius, conspire to overthrow him. They assassinate Gomata and his supporters, then face the question of succession. According to Darius's own account in the Behistun inscription, the 7 conspirators agreed to let the gods choose the next king through an omen. They will ride out at dawn, and the man whose horse neighs first will become king. Darius's groom tricks the horse into neighing, and Darius becomes king. Whether this story is true or propaganda concealing a more violent power struggle, it's significant that Darius feels compelled to claim divine selection. Even after killing the magus who usurped the throne, the new king needs supernatural legitimation. Darius I, 522 to 486 BCE, recognizes both the danger Magi pose and their indispensability. He purges those involved in Gomata's conspiracy, executing Magi leaders and suppressing what he characterizes as a Magi rebellion. Yet he simultaneously elevates loyal Magi to high positions, understanding that he needs their expertise and legitimating authority. Darius presents himself in inscriptions as chosen by Ahura Mazda, champion of truth against the lie and righteous ruler who honors the gods. This requires Magi cooperation to be credible. He builds fire temples, the central institutions of Zoroastrian worship, throughout his empire, enriching the Magi who maintain them. The Behistun inscription itself, Darius's massive carved propaganda on a cliff face, reveals the religious framework sustaining Persian kingship. Carved in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian for maximum distribution, the inscription presents Darius's rise to power as divinely ordained. Ahura Mazda granted him the kingdom. His enemies were followers of the lie. His victory proved divine favor. This theological framing, which only works if Magi endorse it, becomes the template for Persian royal legitimacy. Future kings will present themselves similarly, always as Ahura Mazda's chosen champions, always requiring Magi validation of that claim. The Magi's economic power, while less spectacular than Egyptian temples, is nonetheless substantial. Fire temples receive royal endowments of land, grain, livestock, and precious metals. As Zoroastrianism spreads through the empire, temples multiply, creating an extensive priestly network dependent on royal patronage, but also controlling significant resources. The Magi, like Mesopotamian and Egyptian priests before them, manage temple estates, organize agricultural production, and function as administrators. This economic base provides independence that makes them difficult for individual kings to suppress. The Magi also develop a reputation for specialized knowledge beyond purely religious matters. They are credited with expertise in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and natural philosophy. Greek writers describe them as wise men and philosophers, experts in the hidden workings of nature. Whether this reputation is entirely deserved or partly propaganda, it enhances Magi prestige and makes them useful to rulers. Kings need competent administrators, astronomers for calendar keeping, physicians for health, and advisors for complex decisions. The Magi fill all these roles, making themselves indispensable across multiple dimensions of governance. The practice of royal brother-sister marriage among the Achaemenids, shocking to Greeks but accepted in Persian tradition, also strengthens priestly influence. These marriages require religious justification and ritual management. The Magi provide both, explaining such unions as necessary for maintaining royal bloodline purity and performing the ceremonies that make them acceptable. This gives priests intimate involvement in royal family dynamics, including succession planning. Disputes over succession often involve competing claims about which union was ritually proper. Which heir is religiously legitimate questions only Magi can authoritatively answer. When Alexander the Great conquers Persia, 334 to 330 BCE, he encounters the Magi's influence directly. After defeating Darius III and occupying Persepolis, Alexander burns the royal palace, whether deliberately or accidentally remains debated. But he does not attempt to eliminate the Magi. Instead, recognizing their continuing authority over Persian populations, he retains them in administrative and religious roles. Alexander even consults Magi diviners before battles, adopting Persian practices to legitimize his rule over Persian territories. The conqueror bows to the priest's institutional power. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his empire fragments among his generals. In the eastern portions, which become the Seleucid Empire, Zoroastrianism and the Magi persist, though with diminished political influence as Greek culture dominates the ruling class. The real resurgence of Magi power comes with the Parthian Empire, 247 BCE to 224 CE, which revives Persian identity and elevates Zoroastrianism. Under the Parthians, Magi again become central to court life, advisors to kings, and guardians of religious tradition. The Sasanian Empire 224-651 CE, Persia's final pre-Islamic dynasty, creates the most theocratic Persian state in history. Sasanian kings work intimately with the Magi, now organized into a formal church hierarchy headed by a chief magus. The empire adopts Zoroastrianism as state religion, persecutes religious minorities, and creates a religious establishment that rivals any in the ancient world. The Magi reach their apex of institutional power, functioning essentially as a state church with legal authority, massive land holdings, and the power to enforce religious orthodoxy. They have evolved from the advisors and ritual specialists of the Achaemenid period into a full theocratic establishment. This ultimate success becomes their downfall. When Arab Muslim armies conquer Persia in the 7th century CE, they face not just a political empire, but a religious establishment so identified with that empire that it cannot survive the conquest. The Sasanian state and the Magi hierarchy fall together. Zoroastrianism, once the religion of the world's greatest empire, becomes a minority faith, surviving in small communities in Iran and among Parsi populations in India. The priests who once made and unmade Persian emperors fade into obscurity, their power broken by military defeat and religious replacement. The Magi's millennium of influence teaches several lessons. First, in sacral monarchies where kingship claims divine sanction, those who control access to the divine control access to legitimacy. The Magi's power peaked when their validation was essential for royal authority and declined when secular or alternative religious authorities could provide legitimation. Second, control over royal education shapes future rulers' worldviews, making priestly influence self-perpetuating. Third, monopoly over specialized knowledge dream interpretation, astrology, ritual procedure creates dependencies that translate into political influence. Finally, ultimate success can be a trap. The Sasanian Magi became so thoroughly identified with the state that when the state fell, they fell with it. Sometimes, the wisest priestly strategy is influence without complete power. Chapter 6. Rome's peculiar priests. The Roman Republic and Empire present ancient history as great exception to the pattern of priestly power dominating kingship. Rome develops a sophisticated religious system with elaborate priesthoods, complex rituals, and deep integration of religion into political life. Yet Roman priests never achieved the political independence or dominance that characterizes priesthoods elsewhere. The Roman case teaches crucial lessons about what prevents priestly power from overwhelming secular authority and reveals how political structures can subordinate religious institutions without eliminating their influence. The key to understanding Roman exceptionalism lies in how the Republic structures religious authority. Rather than creating an independent priestly class, Rome makes priesthood a role within the existing political elite. The major Roman priesthoods, the pontifices, augurs, flamens, and others are positions held by senators and magistrates who pursue normal political careers while also performing religious duties. There is no separate priestly caste, no special training from childhood, no distinct priestly identity that separates religious authorities from political ones. A man might serve as consul commanding legions one year, then as augur taking omens the next, then as provincial governor after that. Religion and politics are thoroughly integrated, but with politics clearly dominant. The College of Pontiffs, the most important priestly body, illustrates this integration. The pontifices oversee Rome's religious calendar, maintain religious law, supervise Vestal virgins, and ensure proper ritual performance. At their head stands the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief religious authority. But the position is elective, not hereditary or determined by religious criteria. Political leaders compete for the office, as they compete for consulships or other magistracies. Julius Caesar holds the position from 63 BCE until his assassination in 44 BCE, combining it with military commands and dictatorial powers. Augustus and subsequent emperors monopolized the office, making the supreme religious authority simply one more imperial title. The Pontifex Maximus is not a priest who influences politics, but a politician who also performs religious functions. The augurs provide another example. These priests interpret omens from bird flights, lightning, and sacred chickens to determine whether gods favor proposed actions. Augury is essential to Roman public life. No military campaign, no legislative assembly, no election proceeds without favorable omens. This could give augurs enormous power, as it does for priests in other civilizations. But Roman augury is subordinated to political control through several mechanisms. First, augurs are political appointees from senatorial families. Second, there are rules limiting when omens can be taken and how they can be interpreted. Third, unfavorable omens can sometimes be ignored through technical procedures. Fourth, and most cynically, augurs can manipulate the system to produce desired results. The sacred chickens famously illustrate Roman pragmatism about religious authority. Before naval battles, Romans consult the sacred chickens. If they eat the food offered, omens are favorable. If they refuse, omens are bad. In 249 BCE, during the First Punic War, the consul Publius Claudius Pulcher finds the chickens won't eat before a planned naval engagement. Rather than postponing the battle, he declares, "If they won't eat, let them drink," and throws the chickens overboard. He then proceeds with the battle, which becomes a disastrous defeat. Claudius is prosecuted upon return to Rome, not for impiety toward the gods, but for political incompetence in ignoring omens. The episode reveals Roman religious attitudes. Omens matter politically and legally, but religion serves state purposes rather than constraining state action through independent priestly authority. Rome does maintain one genuinely independent priestly institution, the Vestal Virgins. These 6 women, selected as children from aristocratic families, serve 30-year terms maintaining the sacred fire of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. They live in the temple complex, take vows of chastity, and perform crucial rituals. The Vestals possess remarkable privileges. They own property, make wills, have special seats at games, and their intercession can save condemned prisoners. A Vestal who violates her chastity vow faces horrific punishment, burial alive. Yet even the Vestals don't achieve independent political power. They are honored, respected, even feared, but they don't make policy, don't determine succession, don't control vast economic resources. They represent the sacred, but don't rule through it. The Roman structure prevents priestly power accumulation through several mechanisms. First, making priesthood a political office, rather than a separate profession, prevents development of independent priestly class interests. Priests are senators first, priests second. Their primary loyalty is to their families and factions, not to institutional religious authority. Second, Rome's religious pluralism prevents any single priesthood from monopolizing access to divine favor. Multiple priestly colleges, each with different functions, prevent concentration of religious authority. Third, Roman religion is fundamentally contractual rather than theological. Romans worship gods through correct ritual performance, orthopraxy, rather than correct belief, orthodoxy. As long as traditional rituals are performed properly, Romans care little about underlying theology. This makes religion less ideologically powerful and more amenable to political manipulation. Fourth, Rome's expansion incorporates diverse religious traditions, creating religious pluralism that undermines any single priesthood's authority. When Rome conquers Greek cities, Egyptian territories, or Syrian provinces, it doesn't impose Roman gods exclusively, but instead practices syncretism, identifying foreign deities with Roman ones and allowing continued worship. This pluralism means no priesthood can claim exclusive access to divine favor. The gods themselves are multiple, variable, and politically malleable. Yet Roman religion is not purely cynical political theater. Romans genuinely believe divine favor matters to state success. When catastrophes occur, military defeats, earthquakes occur, military defeats, earthquakes, epidemics. Romans assume divine anger and seek priestly guidance for appropriate expiation rituals. The Sibylline books, collections of prophecies supposedly dating to Rome's archaic period, are consulted during crises. The priesthoods that maintain and interpret these texts wield significant influence during emergencies, though this influence rarely extends beyond crisis management to day-to-day governance. The imperial period introduces new dynamics. Augustus and subsequent emperors claim special relationship with the gods, particularly Apollo for Augustus. Imperial cult develops, with deceased emperors deified and temples built for their worship. Living emperors receive honors approaching divinity, especially in eastern provinces accustomed to divine kingship. This could elevate religious authority, but it actually subordinates it further. By making the emperor himself the supreme religious authority, Pontifex Maximus, son of the divine Julius, intermediary between gods and humans, the imperial system eliminates any possibility of independent priestly power challenging political authority. The arrival of Christianity transforms this system fundamentally. Early Christians refused to participate in imperial cult, seeing it as idolatry. They organized churches with bishops, priests, and deacons who see themselves as serving a higher authority than the emperor. As Christianity grows, Roman authorities face, for the first time, a religious institution that claims authority independent of the state and even superior to it. The confrontation produces centuries of persecution, compromise, and eventually Christian triumph. When Constantine converts to Christianity in 312 CE, he attempts to maintain the Roman model of state-controlled religion, now with Christianity as the favored faith. He convenes the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE to settle theological disputes, treating Christian bishops as he would have treated Roman augurs as religious specialists whom the emperor can gather, direct, and utilize for political purposes. But Christianity's institutional structure and ideological claims resist this subordination. Christian bishops insist they answer to God before Caesar, that spiritual authority transcends political power, that the church possesses independent authority to determine doctrine and discipline. The tension between imperial authority and episcopal independence defines late Roman and Byzantine history. Emperors attempt to control Christianity through church councils, episcopal appointments, and theological edicts. Bishops resist, claiming spiritual independence. The struggle produces the Arian controversy, the Monophysite crisis, and endless theological political conflicts. In the Western Empire, as imperial authority collapses in the 5th century, bishops fill the vacuum, becoming political leaders as well as spiritual ones. The Bishop of Rome, the Pope, emerges as the most powerful figure in Western Europe, ultimately claiming authority over emperors themselves. Rome's millennium-long success in subordinating religious to political authority demonstrates that priestly power is not inevitable. Specific institutional structures making priesthood a political office, distributing religious authority among multiple institutions, practicing religious pluralism, emphasizing orthopraxy over orthodoxy, can prevent priests from achieving the independent power they wield in Egypt, Persia, or Mesopotamia. But Rome also demonstrates that these structures are fragile. When Christianity introduces a religious system with different assumptions, claims of exclusive truth, organizational independence, theological authority transcending political power, the Roman model breaks down. The priests of the Christian God prove impossible to subordinate as the augurs and pontifices were, and medieval Europe becomes the theocracy that Rome never was. Chapter 7. The Brahmins' eternal authority in the Indian subcontinent. Priestly power achieves its most enduring and comprehensive form through the Brahmin caste system. For over 3,000 years from the Vedic period, 1500 BCE, to the present day, Brahmins maintain their position at the top of India's social hierarchy, not through political rule or military force, but through control of religious rituals, sacred knowledge, and the ideological framework that defines social order itself. The Brahmin system represents priestly power at its most sophisticated, not the dramatic confrontations between prophets and kings seen in Israel, not the institutional wealth of Egyptian temples, but a subtle, pervasive authority that shapes civilization at its deepest levels. The Brahmin position emerges during the Vedic period, when Indo-Aryan peoples migrate into the Indian subcontinent, bringing with them a religious system centered on elaborate sacrificial rituals and hymns preserved in the Vedas' sacred texts that become Hinduism's foundation. The Vedic religion requires complex sacrifices performed with precise ritual procedure. Only specially trained priests possess the knowledge to perform these rituals correctly, and incorrect performance is believed to bring cosmic disaster. This creates the Brahmins' fundamental power base. Monopoly over ritual knowledge essential for maintaining cosmic order. The theory of Varna, the four-class system, provides ideological justification for Brahmin supremacy. According to the Rig Veda's Purusha Sukta hymn, the four Varnas originated when the gods sacrificed the cosmic giant, Purusha. Brahmins emerged from his mouth, Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers, from his arms, Vaishyas, merchants and farmers, from his thighs, and Shudras, laborers, from his feet. This mythological origin establishes Brahmins as inherently superior, positioned at the top not through human decision, but through cosmic structure established at creation itself. Questioning Brahmin supremacy means questioning the universe's fundamental organization. Brahmins develop several mechanisms for maintaining their position. First, they control access to sacred texts. The Vedas, and later the Upanishads, Brahmanas, and other sacred literature are written in Sanskrit, a language that requires years of study to master. Brahmins maintain exclusive right to learn, teach, and interpret these texts. Lower castes are forbidden even to hear Vedic recitations. Legend holds that a Shudra, who overhears Vedic chanting, should have molten lead poured in his ears. This creates absolute knowledge monopoly more extreme than anything seen in Mesopotamia, Egypt, or anywhere else. Second, Brahmins define themselves as essential mediators between humans and gods. The sacrificial rituals that maintain cosmic order, ensure agricultural fertility, and guarantee royal success can only be performed by Brahmins. A king, no matter how powerful, cannot perform his own coronation. A warrior, no matter how brave, cannot conduct the sacrifices that bring victory in battle. Everyone depends on Brahmins for life's crucial transitions, birth rituals, coming-of-age ceremonies, marriages, death rites. This dependency translates into power. Third, and most ingeniously, Brahmins developed the concept of dharma duty and righteous living appropriate to one's position in the cosmic order. Each Varna has its dharma. Brahmins must study, teach, and perform rituals. Kshatriyas must fight and govern. Vaishyas must engage in commerce and agriculture. Shudras must serve the higher Varnas. Following one's dharma leads to good karma and favorable rebirth in the next life. Violating dharma leads to bad karma and rebirth into lower forms, perhaps as animals or in hellish realms. This creates a self-enforcing system where social hierarchy is internalized as cosmic necessity. The doctrine of karma and reincarnation is crucial to Brahmin power. If social position is arbitrary or imposed by force, people might rebel. But if one's current position reflects actions in previous lives, and if current actions determine future lives, then the system appears as impersonal cosmic justice rather than human oppression. A Shudra isn't oppressed by Brahmins, but experiencing the consequences of his own past life actions. His path to better circumstances lies not in revolution, but in faithfully performing Shudra Dharma, thereby earning better rebirth. The Brahmins have theologized inequality into a system that makes victims of hierarchy complicit in maintaining it. Brahmin power over rulers is particularly sophisticated. Unlike Egyptian pharaohs who claim divinity or Persian kings who are Ahura Mazda's chosen ones, Indian kings are simply Kshatriyas, members of the warrior class, superior to merchants and laborers, but inferior to Brahmins. A king's duty is Rajadharma, ruling justly, protecting subjects, supporting Brahmins. But he remains subordinate to priestly authority in spiritual matters. The coronation ritual, the Abhisheka, must be performed by Brahmins. Royal legitimacy flows through Brahmin ritual action. The relationship between Brahmins and kings is theoretically complementary. Brahmins provide spiritual authority, knowledge, and ritual services. Kings provide military protection, political order, and material support. The Arthashastra, a political treatise attributed to Kautilya, circa 350 to 275 BCE, acknowledges both powers. The king rules the earthly realm but must honor and support Brahmins who control the spiritual realm. In practice, this creates constant negotiation. Strong kings can subordinate Brahmins to royal will, using patronage to reward compliant priests and withdraw support from difficult ones. Weak kings find themselves dominated by Brahmin advisors who claim to speak for Dharma and cosmic order. The Buddhist challenge to Brahmin authority in the 6th–5th centuries BCE reveals both the system's vulnerabilities and its resilience. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, explicitly rejects Brahmin claims of inherent superiority. He teaches that spiritual advancement comes through individual effort and enlightenment, not birth into the Brahmin caste. He performs religious teachings in Prakrit, common languages, rather than Sanskrit, democratizing access to spiritual knowledge. Early Buddhism attracts merchants, warriors, and lower caste people frustrated by Brahmin dominance. Several Indian rulers, most famously Emperor Ashoka, 268 to 232 BCE of the Mauryan Empire, embrace Buddhism and promote it throughout their realms. For centuries, Buddhism flourishes in India, threatening to displace Brahmanism entirely. Yet ultimately, Brahmins prevail through adaptation and absorption. They incorporate Buddhist ideas into evolving Hinduism, develop devotional bhakti movements that emphasize personal devotion over ritual sacrifice, and maintain their crucial role in life cycle rituals that even Buddhist families want performed. By the medieval period, Buddhism has largely disappeared from India itself, though it thrives in other Asian regions. Brahmanism, evolving into classical Hinduism, has reasserted dominance. Brahmin economic power develops differently than in Egypt or Mesopotamia. Rather than controlling vast temple estates, Brahmins receive their support through grants of tax-free agricultural land from kings, and wealthy donors through fees for performing rituals, and through voluntary donations from those seeking spiritual merit. This decentralized economic base makes Brahmins less vulnerable to confiscation by hostile rulers, but also less wealthy individually than priests in some other civilizations. A Brahmin's power comes more from status and knowledge than from personal wealth. The Jajmani system institutionalizes these economic relationships. In Indian villages, families of different castes have hereditary relationships where higher castes receive services from lower castes in exchange for food, clothing, or other goods. Brahmins receive grain and other necessities from farming families in exchange for performing rituals. This creates local economic relationships that make Brahmins economically secure, while also binding them into village economies. They are privileged, but not separated, honored, but also dependent on others' agricultural production. Brahmin dietary restrictions and purity rules reinforce their position through daily practice. Brahmins follow strict vegetarianism, avoid alcohol, observe elaborate purity regulations regarding food preparation, maintain sexual restraint, and perform daily purification rituals. These practices, burdensome and time-consuming, serve as continuous demonstrations of Brahmin difference and superiority. The discipline required to maintain Brahmin purity standards becomes evidence of Brahmin's special nature. Those who can't or won't follow these rules are self-evidently inferior, while Brahmins who maintain them prove their worthiness for high status. Colonial British rule, 18th–20th centuries CE, challenges and paradoxically reinforces Brahmin power. British administrators seeking to understand and govern India rely heavily on Brahmin advisors and Sanskrit texts that present Brahmin-centered views of Indian society. British census categories rigidify caste distinctions that were previously more fluid. British education in English creates new opportunities for Brahmins. whose traditional emphasis on learning makes them quick to adopt Western education. Brahmins become disproportionately represented in colonial administration, law, medicine, and education. Their power evolves from purely religious and ritual authority into modern professional dominance. Independent India's constitution, adopted in 1950, formally abolishes caste discrimination and introduces affirmative action for lower castes. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, himself from an untouchable background, leads efforts to dismantle caste hierarchy legally. Yet Brahmin social dominance persists informally. Brahmins remain overrepresented in academia, media, politics, and other prestigious professions. Caste discrimination, though illegal, continues in marriage arrangements, social interactions, and sometimes economic opportunities. The system that Brahmins helped create 3,000 years ago proves remarkably resistant to legal reform. The Brahmin achievement is unique in world history, maintaining elite status for 3 millennia without ever ruling directly, without building empires, without controlling massive economic institutions. Their power rests entirely on ideological and ritual foundations, control of sacred knowledge, monopoly on essential rituals, and a cosmic worldview that makes their supremacy appear as natural law rather than human construction. No other priestly class in history maintains dominance so thoroughly for so long through purely cultural and religious means. The Brahmins demonstrate that the most enduring forms of power may be those inscribed not in law or enforced by armies, but those written into civilization's deepest assumptions about how reality itself is structured. Chapter 8. Mesoamerican priests and human sacrifice. In the ritual centers of Mesoamerica, from the Maya cities of the Yucatan to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, priests wield power through humanity as most extreme religious practice. Systematic human sacrifice on a massive scale. The Mesoamerican priesthoods demonstrate how control over life and death, justified through cosmic theology and demonstrated through spectacular public rituals, creates authority that rulers cannot challenge without risking the universe's collapse. Here, priestly power reaches its most dramatic and terrifying expression. The theological foundation of Mesoamerican sacrifice begins with creation mythology. According to Aztec belief, the universe has been created and destroyed 4 times. The current world, the 5th sun, exists only because gods sacrificed themselves to set it in motion. The sun god, Tanishu, requires constant nourishment, human blood, to continue his daily journey across the sky. If sacrifices stop, the sun stops and the universe ends in catastrophe. This creates ultimate stakes. Human sacrifice is not religious excess, but cosmic necessity. The priests who perform these sacrifices aren't murderers, but saviors, maintaining reality itself through their bloody work. The scale is staggering. When the Aztecs dedicate the renovated Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan in 1487, they reportedly sacrifice between 20,000 and 80,000 captives over 4 days. Though modern historians debate these numbers, suggesting they might be exaggerated by Spanish conquistadors or Aztec propagandists. Even conservative estimates suggest thousands die. The sacrificial victims stand in lines stretching for miles, waiting their turn to climb the temple pyramid, where priests will cut open their chests, remove their still-beating hearts, and offer them to the gods. The priests who perform these sacrifices form a specialized, hierarchical institution. They train for years, learning complex rituals, calendrical calculations, astronomical observations, and theological knowledge. They observe strict disciplines: celibacy, fasting, bloodletting from their own bodies, and ritual purifications. They dress distinctively, often never cutting their hair, which becomes matted with sacrificial blood. They paint themselves black. They smell of death and incense. This appearance, deliberately terrifying, reinforces their authority. They are men who walk between life and death, who speak for the gods, who hold the universe's survival in their blood-stained hands. The ritual procedure is carefully choreographed public theater. Victims, usually war captives, but sometimes slaves or even willing volunteers seeking honor, are led up the temple's steep steps to the summit platform. There, before massive crowds gather below, 4 priests seize the victim's limbs while a 5th, the high priest, uses a flint knife to open the chest and extract the heart. The heart is offered to the god's statue, then burned. The body is thrown down the temple steps, where it may be dismembered and consumed in ritual cannibalism, the ultimate communion with divine power. The entire process, repeated dozens or hundreds of times during major festivals, demonstrates priestly control over the most fundamental boundary, life and death. This creates multiple forms of power. First, obvious terror. A priesthood that can kill thousands without legal consequence, that operates above all human authority, that determines who lives and dies according to religious requirements, wields fear as a political tool. Nobles, warriors, and even rulers know that angering the priests might mean designation for sacrifice. The threat need not be explicit. The very existence of sacrificial practice creates ambient fear that makes everyone compliant. Second, military implications. Mesoamerican warfare aims not primarily to kill enemies, but to capture them for sacrifice. Warriors gain prestige not through enemy deaths, but through the number of captives taken. This transforms war into a sacramental activity where the ultimate purpose is providing victims for priests. Military success is measured by priestly standards, how many hearts offered to the gods, making warriors dependent on priests to validate their achievements. Third, economic consequences. War captives are valuable religious resources. Subject cities pay tribute partly in sacrificial victims. This creates a system where political dominance translates into religious resources, and religious requirements justify political expansion. The Aztec Empire's expansion is driven partly by the need for ever more sacrificial victims. The priest's theological demands shape imperial policy. Fourth, control of the calendar. Mesoamerican calendars are extraordinarily complex, interweaving multiple cycles that require expert knowledge to interpret. The priests maintain calendrical expertise, determining when festivals occur, when agricultural work should begin, when warfare is astrologically favorable. The 260-day ritual calendar and 365-day solar calendar create a 52-year cycle at whose completion the world risks ending unless proper rituals are performed. Every 52 years, the new fire ceremony requires all fires in the empire to be extinguished and then relit from a new sacred fire, symbolically renewing the world. The priests who perform this ceremony literally restart civilization. Their temporal power rests on their control of time itself. The relationship between Aztec rulers, Tlatoani, and priests is complementary, but with priestly ideology supreme. The Tlatoani is Huitzilopochtli's chosen representative, a warrior king whose duty is conquest to provide sacrificial victims. But he rules at the god's pleasure, interpreted by priests. The coronation requires priestly rituals. Major decisions require priestly consultation to ensure divine approval. When Montezuma II receives news of Spanish ships arriving on the coast in 1519, he consults priests and magicians to interpret omens. Their inability to provide clear guidance contributes to his initial paralysis when confronting courts. Among the Maya, priestly power manifests differently, but with similar foundations. Maya civilization is more decentralized than the Aztec Empire, comprising numerous independent city-states rather than a unified empire. Each city-state's Ajah, king, rules with divine sanction, but priests control the esoteric knowledge writing, mathematics, astronomy, calendar that makes royal authority credible. Maya hieroglyphic writing is so complex that literacy remains restricted to elite priests and nobles. The priests' monopoly on writing means they control historical records, astronomical tables, and religious texts. They are gatekeepers to knowledge itself. Maya priests practice bloodletting rather than human sacrifice as their primary ritual. Royal bloodletting ceremonies involve the king or queen piercing their own flesh penis, tongue, or lobes to offer blood to the gods. These ceremonies, performed on ritual platforms before public audiences, demonstrate the ruler's piety and maintain cosmic order. But priests orchestrate these ceremonies, prepare the ritual implements, interpret the visions that bloodletting-induced trance states produce, and determine whether the sacrifice is acceptable. The king bleeds, but priests control the meaning of that blood. Maya astronomical observations reach remarkable precision. Priests calculate planetary cycles, predict eclipses, and track Venus with accuracy that won't be exceeded until the modern era. This knowledge serves religious purposes, determining auspicious dates for rituals, interpreting celestial omens, but also demonstrates priestly intellectual superiority. Knowledge becomes power, and the priest's ability to predict celestial events that terrify common people proves divine favor. When priests predict an eclipse and it occurs, their authority is validated spectacularly. The collapse of Maya civilization in the 9th–10th centuries CE remains debated, but evidence suggests that overconsumption of resources for ritual construction and priestly maintenance contributed. Maya rulers compete to build ever larger pyramid temples, commission ever more elaborate stelae recording their achievements, and support ever larger priestly establishments. The resources devoted to these religious purposes strain agricultural production. When climate change brings drought, the inflexible system collapses. Cities are abandoned, the priestly infrastructure evaporates, and Maya civilization fragments. It's a cautionary tale about how priestly power, taken to extremes, can contribute to civilizational collapse. When Spanish retry continue conquistadors arrive in the 16th century, they encounter Mesoamerican priesthoods at their zenith of power. The Spanish are simultaneously horrified and fascinated by the sacrificial practices. Conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo describes entering Aztec temples and finding walls encrusted with dried blood, the stench overwhelming, and racks displaying thousands of human skulls. These descriptions, while possibly exaggerated, capture the reality that Mesoamerican priests have created religious systems more visibly violent than anything Europeans have experienced. The Spanish conquest destroys these priestly establishments with stunning speed. When Cortes and his men, aided by thousands of indigenous allies who resent Aztec domination, topple Montezuma II and conquer Tenochtitlan in 1521, they systematically demolish the temples, execute priests who resist conversion, and suppress human sacrifice. Within a generation, the elaborate priestly hierarchies that controlled Mesoamerican civilizations for centuries are shattered. Catholic priests replace indigenous ones, and the theological framework justifying human sacrifice is replaced by Christianity. Why does Mesoamerican priestly power collapse so quickly under Spanish assault when Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and other priesthoods showed greater resilience? Several factors explain this. First, the Spanish bring military technology horses, steel weapons, guns, that gives them overwhelming tactical advantage despite vastly inferior numbers. Second, epidemic diseases, especially smallpox, kill perhaps 90% of the indigenous population within a century, destroying the demographic base that supported priestly institutions. Third, the Spanish conquer during a moment of crisis when Aztec imperial overreach has created widespread resentment among subject peoples who eagerly ally with the conquistadors. But there's a deeper theological reason. The Mesoamerican priestly power rests entirely on a cosmic claim. Sacrifice maintains the sun's motion and prevents universal catastrophe. When the Spanish arrive, destroy the temples, stop the sacrifices, and the sun continues rising every morning, this cosmic claim is falsified spectacularly. If the universe doesn't end when sacrifices stop, then the entire theological framework justifying priestly power collapses. The priests promised that sacrifice was cosmically necessary. The Spanish prove it isn't. The priest's authority, built entirely on this claim, evaporates. Additionally, the extreme violence of human sacrifice, while effective at creating fear and demonstrating priestly power, also generates hatred. Many subject peoples, and even some Aztecs, find the practice horrifying. When the Spanish offer an alternative religious system that doesn't require human hearts, many indigenous people convert willingly, even enthusiastically. The priesthood's most dramatic demonstration of power becomes the source of their unpopularity, and unpopularity proves fatal when a conquering power offers alternatives. The Mesoamerican case teaches several crucial lessons about priestly power. First, spectacular demonstration of control over life and death creates immediate visceral authority that makes priests seem superhuman. The drama of mass human sacrifice, whatever its moral implications, undeniably demonstrates power in its rawest form. Second, creating religious requirements that shape state policy. The need for war to capture sacrificial victims gives priests indirect but profound influence over political and military affairs. Third, control of complex technical knowledge, calendar, astronomy, writing, makes priests indispensable advisors, even to powerful rulers. But Mesoamerica also reveals priestly power's limitations. When theological claims are falsifiable, when you promise cosmic catastrophe if sacrifices stop and then they stop without catastrophe, your authority collapses. When your religious practices generate such revulsion that people welcome alternatives, you're vulnerable to replacement. When your power depends entirely on belief without independent economic or military resources, you cannot survive military conquest that destroys the belief system. The Mesoamerican priests wielded extraordinary power at their peak, but that power proved brittle when challenged by forces that could break the cycle of fear and sacrifice. Chapter 9. The Chinese Exception Ancient. China presents yet another variation in the relationship between religious authority and political power. Unlike other ancient civilizations where priests formed distinct social classes, claiming to mediate between humans and gods, China develops a system where educated bureaucrats perform religious functions as part of their administrative duties, and where philosophical traditions emphasize human moral cultivation over divine intervention. The Chinese case demonstrates how sophisticated civilizations can minimize independent priestly power while maintaining elaborate religious systems. During the Shang Dynasty, 1600–1046 BCE, China does possess a priestly class. Shamanic specialists perform divination rituals, oracle bone readings, and sacrifices to ancestors and nature deities. The Shang kings themselves serve as chief priests, mediating between the human and spirit worlds. Oracle bones, turtle shells, and ox scapulae, heated until they crack, with the cracks interpreted as divine messages, provide guidance for royal decisions. The specialists who perform these divinations wield significant influence, as they control access to ancestral wisdom and divine will. But the Zhou Dynasty, 1046–256 BCE, transforms this system fundamentally. The Zhou developed the concept of the mandate of heaven, Tianming, which provides religious legitimation for kingship, but in a way that empowers rulers rather than priests. According to this doctrine, heaven grants the right to rule to virtuous kings who govern justly and perform proper rituals. Crucially, heaven can withdraw this mandate from corrupt or incompetent rulers, legitimizing rebellion and dynastic change. This creates a self-correcting mechanism where political success or failure becomes evidence of divine favor or disfavor, without requiring priestly interpretation. The mandate of heaven differs fundamentally from divine right theories in other civilizations. An Egyptian pharaoh is inherently divine. A Persian king is Ahura Mazda's chosen one. An Israelite king is anointed by prophets speaking for God. But a Chinese emperor possesses the mandate of heaven only as long as he governs effectively. Natural disasters, military defeats, economic crises, or social unrest all suggest heaven has withdrawn its mandate. This makes Chinese kingship conditional, but it also makes it less dependent on priestly validation. Evidence of the mandate comes from practical results, peace, prosperity, order, not from rituals performed by priests. Confucius, 551 to 479 BCE, and his disciples further diminished priestly power by shifting Chinese thought toward human ethics rather than divine intervention. Confucianism emphasizes proper relationships, moral cultivation, ritual correctness, and good governance through virtuous example. When asked about serving spirits and gods, Confucius famously responds, "If we cannot yet serve humanity, how can we serve spirits?" He doesn't deny the supernatural but makes it secondary to human moral concerns. This philosophical orientation makes China remarkably this worldly, focused on practical governance rather than theological speculation. Confucian thought treats ritual as crucial, but ritual as ethical training and social organization rather than as supernatural transaction. The elaborate ceremonies that Confucians prescribe ancestor veneration, state sacrifices, court protocol serve to instill virtue, maintain hierarchy, and demonstrate civilization. They are not bargaining with gods for favorable outcomes, but rather performing the patterns that maintain cosmic harmony, Tiandao. This understanding of ritual reduces the power of those who perform it. If ritual's purpose is moral education and social order rather than propitiating deities, then ritual specialists become ethics teachers and administrators rather than powerful intermediaries between humans and gods. The civil service examination system developed gradually from the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 220 CE onward, and reaching full form in the Tang and Song dynasties, creates an educated bureaucratic class whose authority rests on Confucian learning rather than priestly status. To serve in government, men must master Confucian classics through decades of study, then pass grueling examinations testing this knowledge. Successful candidates become officials who govern provinces, collect taxes, judge legal cases, manage public works, and also perform state religious ceremonies. This system makes religious functions bureaucratic responsibilities rather than priestly privileges. When an official performs the spring plowing ceremony, he does so as representative of the emperor and the state, not as priest mediating with agricultural deities. When he conducts sacrifices at local temples, he's fulfilling administrative duties, not exercising independent spiritual authority. The conflation of administrative and ritual roles prevents formation of an independent priestly class with interests distinct from state interests. Buddhism's arrival in China during the Han Dynasty introduces something China had previously lacked: an independent religious institution with its own hierarchy, doctrines, and claims to spiritual authority transcending political power. Buddhist monasteries spread throughout China, accumulating wealth through donations, controlling agricultural estates, and providing education, healthcare, and social services. Buddhist monks form a distinct class separate from the Confucian bureaucracy, loyal to Dharma rather than emperor. This is unprecedented in Chinese civilization. The Chinese state responds to Buddhism with ambivalence. During some periods, emperors patronize Buddhism lavishly, building monasteries, sponsoring translations of sutras, and even occasionally abdicating to become monks. Buddhism's philosophical sophistication and promise of salvation appeal to both elite and common people. But periodically, the state perceives Buddhist institutional power as threatening and launches suppressions. The most severe occurs in 845 CE under Emperor Wuzong, who orders destruction of 4,600 monasteries. defrocking of 260,000 monks and nuns, and confiscation of monastery lands. The persecution nearly destroys Chinese Buddhism as an independent institution. The persecution's justification reveals Chinese attitudes toward independent religious authority. Imperial edicts criticize Buddhism as foreign, accuse monks of economic parasitism, living off donations while producing nothing, and charge that monastic vows of celibacy violate Confucian family obligations. Most tellingly, edicts complain that Buddhist institutions divide people's loyalty, encouraging them to serve Buddha rather than emperor. The Chinese state, unlike European or Middle Eastern kingdoms, cannot tolerate powerful institutions, claiming authority independent of imperial control. Buddhism survives in China, but in subordinated, Sinicized forms. Chan, Zen, Buddhism, which emerges during the Tang dynasty, emphasizes meditation and sudden enlightenment over institutional hierarchy and scriptural study. It's a more individualistic, less institutionally powerful form of Buddhism that the Chinese state finds less threatening. Pure Land Buddhism, focused on faith in Amitabha Buddha and accessible to laypeople without monastic intermediaries, also thrives. These forms of Buddhism can coexist with Confucian state ideology because they do claim comprehensive authority over society. Taoism, China's indigenous religious, philosophical tradition, presents another alternative. Taoist priests perform rituals, make talismans, practice alchemy, and claim esoteric knowledge. Taoist temples accumulate some wealth and influence. But Taoism's philosophical core emphasizes withdrawal from worldly affairs, living in harmony with natural patterns, Tao, and skepticism toward institutional authority, including religious authority. Taoist priests never develop the political ambitions or institutional power of priests in other civilizations. When they do try to influence politics, as during some medieval dynasties, they're quickly suppressed by Confucian bureaucrats who see them as superstitious charlatans. The emperor himself performs the most important state religious ceremonies. The annual sacrifice at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, where the emperor prays for good harvests, is the ritual apex of the Chinese religious year. The emperor alone can perform this ceremony. He is the son of heaven, Tianzi, unique mediator between heaven and humanity. This imperial monopoly on the most sacred rituals prevents any priest from claiming superior religious authority. The highest religious office belongs to the political ruler himself. Local religious life features diverse practices, ancestor veneration, popular deity worship, spirit appeasement, feng shui, fortune-telling, and festival celebrations. Various specialists perform these services. Geomancers determine auspicious building sites. Mediums communicate with spirits. Ritual masters conduct ceremonies. Astrologers calculate favorable dates. But these specialists remain fragmented, local, and subordinate to the Confucian bureaucracy that officially dismisses them as heterodox, even while common people, including many officials, consult them privately. The Chinese system's genius lies in dispersing religious authority so thoroughly that no single institution can accumulate power comparable to Egyptian temples, Mesopotamian priesthoods, or Catholic Church. State religion is bureaucratized and controlled by the emperor. Popular religion is fragmented and unofficial. Buddhism and Taoism are tolerated but subordinated and periodically suppressed if they grow too powerful. The Confucian elite emphasizes human ethics over supernatural concerns. This multi-layered approach prevents any priesthood from achieving the political dominance seen elsewhere. Yet even China cannot entirely eliminate priestly influence. During periods of imperial weakness, religious movements become focuses of opposition. The Yellow Turban Rebellion, 184 CE, led by Taoist religious leaders, nearly topples the Han Dynasty. The White Lotus rebellions during the Ming and Qing dynasties combined Buddhist and indigenous religious elements with social protest. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, led by a man claiming to be Jesus Christ's younger brother, kills 20 million people and almost destroys the Qing dynasty. Religious authority, even when officially suppressed, can emerge during crises to challenge political power. The Chinese case teaches that minimizing priestly power requires specific conditions, philosophical traditions that emphasize human ethics over divine intervention, bureaucratic systems that make religious functions administrative duties rather than priestly privileges, political will to suppress independent religious institutions when they grow powerful, and ideological frameworks that make political success or failure evidence of divine favor without requiring priestly interpretation. These conditions are difficult to maintain consistently, as China's periodic religious rebellions demonstrate. But when maintained, they effectively prevent the dramatic priestly dominance over political authority seen in other ancient civilizations. Chapter 11. The limits of sacred power. Throughout ancient history, powerful rulers periodically attempt to subordinate, reform, or eliminate priestly power. These confrontations reveal both the extraordinary strength of priestly institutions and their ultimate vulnerabilities. The pattern repeats across civilizations. A strong king, frustrated by priestly constraints or envious of priestly wealth, launches a campaign against religious authority. Sometimes he succeeds, sometimes he fails, but the struggle shapes the relationship between secular and sacred power. Akhenaten's religious revolution in Egypt, 1353 to 1336 BCE, represents the most radical attempt to break priestly power in the ancient world. As discussed earlier, Akhenaten declares all traditional gods false, closes their temples, confiscates their vast estates, and establishes monotheistic worship of the Aten with himself as sole intermediary. It's a frontal assault on the most powerful priestly establishment in the world. For 17 years, he maintains this revolution through force of will and royal authority, relocating the capital to Akhenaten, commissioning new art depicting his revolutionary theology, and systematically dismantling priestly infrastructure that took centuries to build. Yet within 3 years of Akhenaten's death, the revolution completely collapses. His son and successor, Tutankhamun, restores the traditional gods and priesthoods. Akhenaten's monuments are demolished, his name erased from king lists, his capital abandoned and forgotten for 3 millennia. Why such complete failure? Several factors explain it. First, Akhenaten lacks sufficient time. 17 years is not enough to eliminate institutions centuries old and deeply embedded in Egyptian society. Second, he faces massive passive resistance. The displaced priesthoods, dispossessed of wealth and status, work continuously to undermine his revolution. Third, his revolution disrupts too much too quickly. By closing temples, he doesn't just attack priests but eliminates institutions that employ thousands, distribute food to the poor, and anchor local communities. The social disruption creates widespread resentment. Fourth, the military and nobility, trained to reverence traditional gods, remain unconvinced by Aten worship. When Akhenaten dies, they restore the old order immediately. Most importantly, Akhenaten makes a strategic error. He tries to eliminate religion rather than control it. Had he gradually reformed priestly institutions, redirected temple wealth toward royal projects while maintaining traditional worship, or co-opted priesthoods rather than abolishing them, he might have succeeded. Instead, by attempting complete religious revolution, he creates a unified opposition of everyone whose interests, beliefs, or livelihoods depend on traditional religion. The breadth of his assault guarantees its failure. The Babylonian king Nabonidus, 556 to 539 BCE, makes different mistakes but meets similar fate. Nabonidus elevates the moon god Sin above Babylon's traditional supreme deity Marduk, antagonizing Marduk's powerful priesthood. He spends years away from Babylon at the Arabian oasis of Taima, failing to perform the crucial New Year's festival that requires royal participation. The Marduk priests portray him as impious and negligent. When Cyrus the Great of Persia invades Babylon in 539 BCE, the Marduk priesthood welcomes him as liberator. Priestly opposition doesn't directly topple Nabonidus, but it undermines his legitimacy and eases Persian conquest. Cyrus, learning from Nabonidus's mistake, immediately honors Marduk and supports his priesthood, securing their backing for Persian rule. Some rulers successfully manage priestly power through co-optation rather than confrontation. Hammurabi of Babylon, 1792 to 1750 BCE, is remembered for his law code. But he also skillfully manages priests by generously endowing temples, appointing loyalists to high priestly offices, and personally participating in religious festivals. He uses priestly support to legitimize his rule, while ensuring priests understand their prosperity depends on royal favor. It's carrot rather than stick, but it keeps priests supportive and subordinate. The Roman Emperor Constantine, 306–337 CE, performs the most successful co-optation of priestly power in ancient history. When he converts to Christianity around 312 CE, he doesn't simply adopt a religion but actively shapes it. He convenes the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, presiding over the gathering of bishops that defines Christian orthodoxy. He funds church construction, grants privileges to clergy, and makes Christianity effectively the empire's favored religion. But he does all this while maintaining ultimate authority. He treats Christian bishops, as he would have treated pagan priests, as religious specialists useful to the state but subordinate to imperial authority. The bishops resist this subordination, insisting they answer to God before emperor. This conflict defines the next centuries of Roman and Byzantine history, as emperors and bishops struggle over authority. Sometimes emperors dominate, appointing and deposing bishops at will. Sometimes bishops prevail, excommunicating emperors or resisting imperial theological edicts. The struggle produces the Arian controversy, the iconoclast crisis, and endless theological political conflicts. Unlike pagan priesthoods, which imperial power could ultimately control, Christian bishops possess an ideological framework claiming authority independent of and superior to political power. Constantine co-opts Christianity successfully in the short term, but in the long term, he imports into the Roman system an institution that cannot be fully subordinated. In China, the Tang Emperor Wuzong, a suppression of Buddhism in 845 CE, demonstrates that sufficiently determined rulers can break even powerful priestly institutions if willing to use force. Wuzong orders destruction of 4,600 monasteries, confiscates their lands, returns 260,000 monks and nuns to lay life, and seizes monastery wealth to refill imperial treasuries. The persecution nearly destroys Chinese Buddhism as an independent institution. It succeeds because Wuzong has military force to implement it, Confucian bureaucrats who support it ideologically, an economic crisis that makes confiscating monastery wealth politically popular. Chinese Buddhism survives only in forms subordinated to state authority. Yet even Wuzong's success proves temporary. After his death, Buddhism gradually recovers, though never to its pre-persecution power. The persecution demonstrates that destroying priestly institutions requires not just one strong emperor, but sustained policy across generations. Without that sustained commitment, religious institutions regenerate like pruned trees, often growing back stronger. Some rulers find middle paths. The Mauryan Emperor Ashoka in India, 268 to 232 BCE, embraces Buddhism and promotes it throughout his empire, but he doesn't destroy Brahmins or ban Hindu practices. Instead, he incorporates Buddhist values into governance while allowing religious pluralism. This avoids direct confrontation while gradually shifting religious authority toward Buddhism. It's successful during his reign, but after his death, Brahmanism reasserts dominance. Without sustained pressure, the more deeply rooted religious system prevails. The confrontations between kings and priests reveal several patterns. First, frontal assaults on established priesthoods rarely succeed unless maintained across generations. Religious institutions survive individual hostile rulers through passive resistance, waiting for succession to change policy. Second, attempts to eliminate religion entirely backfire by creating unified opposition. Gradual reform or co-optation succeeds better than revolutionary destruction. Third, economic factors matter enormously. Rulers who confiscate temple wealth for pressing needs, military crisis, economic collapse, can temporarily gain popular support for anti-priestly measures. Rulers who attack priests during prosperity face accusations of sacrilege. Fourth, priestly power depends on popular belief. When that belief is strong, attacking priests means attacking what people hold sacred, generating massive resistance. When belief weakens, priestly institutions become vulnerable. Akhenaten's revolution fails partly because Egyptians genuinely believe in traditional gods and see his reforms as cosmic violation. Wuzong's Buddhist persecution succeeds partly because many Chinese, influenced by Confucian values, see monasticism as socially parasitic. Fifth, priestly institutions that claim authority transcending political power, like Christian bishops or Buddhist Sangha claiming to serve Buddha rather than emperor, are harder to subordinate than priesthoods that accept roles as state functionaries. The ultimate lesson is that neither political authority nor religious authority consistently dominates. The relationship shifts based on personalities, circumstances, and institutional structures. Strong kings with clear vision, military force, and economic resources can subordinate or even destroy priestly institutions. But priests control tools, ideology, ritual, popular devotion, economic resources, centuries of institutional continuity that make them resilient. They bend under pressure, go underground during persecution, re-emerge when circumstances improve. The struggle between altar and throne defines ancient political history, and neither side achieves permanent victory. The journey through ancient civilizations reveals a startling truth. Behind nearly every throne stood priests whose power often exceeded the monarch's own. From Mesopotamian temples controlling vast agricultural estates to Egyptian priesthoods accumulating wealth that rivaled pharaohs, from Israeli prophets toppling dynasties to Greek oracles shaping Mediterranean politics, from Persian Magi who made emperors to Brahmin castes maintaining supremacy across millennia, from Mesoamerican priests whose sacrificial knives held cosmic authority, to Chinese systems struggling to contain religious power, the pattern repeats with variations across human civilizations. Priestly power was not aberration, but fundamental feature of ancient political systems. How did priests achieve this extraordinary influence? The mechanisms were multiple, sophisticated, and remarkably consistent across diverse cultures. First and most fundamental, priests controlled access to the divine. In societies where gods were real presences whose favor determined crop yields, military victories, and cosmic stability, those who could communicate with gods, interpret their will, and perform rituals that satisfied them possessed power beyond any earthly army. Kings might command soldiers, but priests commanded the attention of the gods themselves, or at least convincingly claimed to. Second, priests monopolized essential knowledge. In early civilizations where illiteracy was rare, priests controlled writing, and with it the ability to record, transmit, and manipulate information. They possessed mathematical expertise for astronomy and calendar keeping, determining when to plant crops and when to conduct festivals. They maintained medical knowledge for healing the sick. They preserved historical records that legitimized or challenged dynastic claims. This knowledge monopoly made priests indispensable advisors whom rulers ignored at their peril. Third, priests developed sophisticated theological frameworks that made their authority appear cosmically necessary rather than humanly constructed. The Mesopotamian concept that cities belonged to gods with kings as divine stewards. The Egyptian theology of Ma'at requiring pharaonic ritual to maintain cosmic order. The mandate of heaven in China. The Dharma system in India. The cosmic necessity of sacrifice in Mesoamerica. All these ideologies transformed priestly services from helpful to absolutely essential. Kings could not legitimately rule without priestly rituals connecting them to divine sanction. Fourth, temple institutions accumulated massive economic resources that gave priests financial power rivaling or exceeding royal treasuries. Through land grants, donations, temple production, and banking operations, priests built economic empires that survived individual rulers and dynasties. This wealth provided independence, allowing priests to resist subordination and sometimes to dictate terms to cash-strapped kings who needed temple loans. Fifth, priests exercised control over life's crucial transitions: birth, coming of age, marriage, death, making them intimately involved in every family's most important moments. This gave priests influence at society's most personal levels, creating loyalties and dependencies that political power could not easily override. When a king threatened priests, he threatened the people who would perform his children's marriages and his own funeral rites. Sixth, priestly institutions demonstrated remarkable continuity across generations while kingships rose and fell. Individual priests died, but priesthoods persisted. Dynasties were overthrown, but temples remained. This institutional longevity gave priests advantages over any individual ruler. They could wait out hostile kings, preserve institutional memory across centuries, and maintain influence through political chaos that destroyed secular institutions. Yet priestly power was never absolute or uncontested. The history of priest-king relations is one of constant negotiation, occasional confrontation, and shifting balances depending on circumstances and personalities. Strong kings subordinated priests through appointments, confiscations, and reforms. Weak kings found themselves dominated by priestly advisors who claimed to speak for divine will. The relationship was dynamic, not static, shaped by economic conditions, military outcomes, popular sentiment, and individual ambitions. The confrontations between secular and sacred authority produced some of history's most dramatic moments. Akhenaten's attempt to break Egyptian priestly power through religious revolution. Israelite prophets declaring God's judgment on kings. The Delphic oracle shaping Greek political decisions for centuries. Persian Magi briefly seizing the imperial throne. The struggle between Roman emperors and Christian bishops over ultimate authority. These conflicts revealed that power's distribution between throne and altar was never permanently settled, but continuously contested. Different civilizations developed different solutions to managing priestly power. Rome's system of making priesthood a political office rather than separate profession successfully prevented independent priestly authority. China's Confucian bureaucracy, which distributed religious functions among educated administrators, minimized priestly institutional power. Egypt's integration of priesthood with royal ideology created complementary rather than competing authorities, though even there, temple wealth eventually challenged pharaonic supremacy. India's caste system elevated Brahmins ideologically while dispersing them economically, creating diffuse rather than centralized priestly power. Mesoamerica's priesthoods accumulated terrifying authority through human sacrifice that proved vulnerable when their cosmic claims were falsified by Spanish conquest. The transition from ancient polytheism to Christianity and Islam transformed priest-king relations fundamentally. The ancient pattern involved priests of various gods serving political authorities while maintaining some independence. Christianity and Islam introduced monotheistic religions, claiming exclusive truth and ultimate authority transcending political power. Christian bishops and Islamic ulema inherited techniques of priestly power from their pagan predecessors: control of sacred knowledge, performance of essential rituals, claims of divine sanction, institutional continuity, but added new elements: exclusive truth claims, extensive written scriptures requiring interpretation, and explicit doctrines asserting religious authority's superiority over political power in spiritual matters. Medieval Europe would see these tensions reach their apex in conflicts between popes and emperors, with religious authority sometimes trumping political power in ways that ancient priests, for all their influence, rarely achieved. The Islamic world developed its own complex negotiations between caliphs claiming political and religious authority and ulama claiming superior knowledge of divine law. The patterns established in ancient civilizations, the mechanisms of priestly power, the strategies of royal resistance, the economic foundations of religious institutions, the ideological claims of divine sanction, continued shaping these later confrontations. The question posed at this exploration's beginning: how did ancient priests control kings and empires? Has multiple answers, because priestly power manifested differently across civilizations. But certain themes recur: control of sacred knowledge and ritual, accumulation of economic resources, claims of divine sanction, institutional continuity across generations, and positioning as indispensable mediators between human continue and divine realms. These mechanisms, refined over millennia, created forms of power that could challenge military might, survive dynastic upheavals, and shape civilizations at their deepest levels. The modern world often imagines political power as secular, resting on military force, economic resources, and legal authority. The ancient world knew better. Political power without religious legitimation was precarious, vulnerable to challenges that question not just a ruler's competence, but his very right to rule. Kings commanded armies, but priests commanded the deeper loyalties that made soldiers willing to fight. Emperors accumulated wealth, but priests controlled the ideological frameworks that determined whether that wealth was rightfully acquired or sacrilegiously stolen. Monarchs proclaimed laws, but priests declared whether those laws aligned with divine will or violated cosmic order. The priest's greatest achievement was making their power appear natural, necessary, and divinely ordained rather than humanly constructed and politically motivated. When Mesopotamian priests declared that cities belonged to gods with kings as mere stewards, they created a framework where priestly authority seemed cosmically obvious. When Egyptian priests developed elaborate rituals supposedly required to maintain mat and prevent chaos, they made themselves indispensable to reality's continuation. When Brahmin priests crafted the doctrine that social hierarchy reflected cosmic order and past life karma, they theologized inequality into something that seemed like impersonal divine justice rather than priestly self-interest. When Mesoamerican priests proclaimed that the sun would stop without human sacrifice, they created ultimate stakes that justified their bloodiest practices. Yet the history of priestly power is not simply one of manipulation and cynicism. Many priests genuinely believed in their religious systems, saw themselves as servants of gods rather than exploiters of believers, and performed their roles with sincere conviction that they were maintaining cosmic order and serving their communities. The power of ancient priesthoods stemmed partly from this genuine conviction, which made their claims more credible than pure cynicism could have achieved. A priest who truly believes he speaks for the gods is more persuasive than one who merely pretends. The intermingling of sincere religious conviction with institutional self-interest makes priestly power particularly complex and enduring. The economic dimension of priestly power deserves special emphasis because it is often overlooked in favor of more dramatic religious and ideological aspects. Yet the great temples functioning as landowners, manufacturers, traders, employers, and bankers provided foundations for priestly influence that survived even when religious belief weakened. A temple that employed thousands, lent money to merchants and kings, stored valuable deposits, and controlled productive estates remained important even to skeptics who doubted the god's existence. This economic power, accumulated over generations and protected by religious sanctity that made confiscation difficult, gave priests resources independent of royal patronage. The wisest priests understood that economic self-sufficiency was the ultimate guarantee of institutional survival. The knowledge monopolies that priests maintained: literacy, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law. History provided another enduring power base. In societies where education was rare and difficult to obtain, where complex calculations required expertise most people lacked, where medical knowledge could mean the difference between life and death, those who possessed such knowledge commanded respect and influence. Priestly control over writing was particularly crucial, as it allowed priests to record, interpret, and, when necessary, modify the historical and legal text that legitimized political arrangements. The king who could not read was at the mercy of priests who claimed to read divine will in texts he could not verify. The ritual dimension of priestly power operated on multiple levels. On the surface, rituals were performances that honored gods, marked important transitions, and maintained cosmic order. More deeply, rituals were demonstrations of priestly expertise and necessity. The more complex the ritual, the more specialized knowledge it required, the more indispensable became the priests who could perform it correctly. The most sophisticated priesthoods developed rituals so elaborate that only decades of training allowed proper performance. This created professional barriers to entry that protected priestly monopolies while simultaneously proving priestly value. If anyone could perform the rituals, priests would be unnecessary. If rituals were simple, priests would not be special. Complex, essential rituals requiring specialized expertise made priests irreplaceable. The confrontations between kings and priests, discussed throughout this exploration, revealed the limits of priestly power. Priests could not ultimately withstand determined royal opposition backed by military force and popular support. Akhenaten's revolution failed, but it lasted 17 years and only collapsed after his death, demonstrating that even the world's most powerful priesthood could be temporarily overthrown by a sufficiently determined pharaoh. The Chinese suppressions of Buddhism showed that priestly institutions could be shattered when political will aligned with bureaucratic capability and ideological justification. The collapse of Mesoamerican priesthoods under Spanish assault demonstrated that priestly authority dependent entirely on theological claims could be destroyed when those claims were falsified. Yet the resilience of priestly institutions is equally striking. Egyptian priesthoods recovered completely after Akhenaten's death, erasing his revolution so thoroughly that his very name disappeared from history for 3 millennia. Chinese Buddhism survived multiple persecutions, regenerating after each suppression. Christian bishops, persecuted for 3 centuries, ultimately converted the Roman Empire itself. Brahmins maintained their position for 3,000 years through every political upheaval India experienced. This resilience stemmed from the multiple foundations of priestly power. When one foundation weakened, others sustained the institution until conditions allowed recovery. The modern legacy of ancient priestly power is profound, though often unrecognized. The separation of church and state, enshrined in many modern constitutions, represents a solution to problems that ancient civilizations struggled with for millennia: how to prevent religious authorities from dominating political institutions while allowing religious freedom. The concept of secular government, where political authority derives from human sources rather than divine sanction, would have been nearly incomprehensible to ancient peoples who assumed all legitimate authority had sacred foundations. The idea that religious institutions should not control vast economic resources, that they should be taxed like other entities, that they should not monopolize education or knowledge. These modern principles respond to patterns of priestly power accumulation perfected in the ancient world. The techniques of priestly power controlling sacred narratives, monopolizing specialized knowledge, claiming to mediate between the transcendent and mundane, positioning oneself as indispensable to community well-being, accumulating economic resources through voluntary donations, creating complex procedures that require expert performance remain relevant. Modern professions from law to medicine to academia employ some of these same mechanisms. Specialized knowledge requiring extensive training, complex procedures requiring expert performance, claims of serving higher purposes beyond mere material gain, professional organizations that control entry and maintain standards. The priests of ancient civilizations pioneered institutional forms that continue shaping how authority functions in modern societies. The question of whether priestly power was, on balance, beneficial or harmful to ancient civilizations admits no simple answer. Priests preserved knowledge, maintained cultural continuity, provided social services, created magnificent art and architecture, developed sophisticated philosophies, and gave meaning to human existence within coherent cosmological frameworks. They also accumulated vast wealth while much of the population starved, justified oppressive social hierarchies, sometimes demanded horrific practices like human sacrifice, resisted beneficial changes that threatened their interests, and occasionally wielded power in ways that destabilized societies or obstructed necessary reforms. Like all powerful institutions, priesthoods did both great good and great harm, often simultaneously. What is clear is that priestly power was not ancillary to ancient politics, but central to it. Understanding ancient civilizations requires understanding how priests shaped them. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Jerusalem, the Oracle at Delphi, the stupas of India, the sacrificial platforms of Mesoamerica. These monuments testify to the extraordinary resources that societies devoted to religious purposes and the power of those who controlled them. The ancient world was not secular with a thin religious overlay, but fundamentally religious with secular concerns filtered through sacred frameworks that priests largely controlled. The priests who controlled kings and empires left legacies that transcend their particular religious systems. They established patterns of institutional authority, pioneered techniques of knowledge control, developed sophisticated ideologies of legitimation, created economic systems that mixed the sacred and profitable, and demonstrated that power need not flow from the sword when it can flow from the altar. They showed that those who control meaning, who can determine what counts as legitimate, what the gods demand, what cosmic order requires, wield power as real as any armies. In the end, the history of priestly power in ancient civilizations teaches us that authority comes in multiple forms. Military power, economic resources, and legal authority are obvious and visible. But the power to define what is sacred, to interpret divine will, to perform rituals that maintain cosmic order, to control knowledge that others need, to shape the ideological frameworks within which all other power operates. These forms of authority wielded by ancient priests proved equally potent and often more enduring. The priests who controlled kings and empires did so not despite lacking conventional power, but by exercising forms of power, more subtle, more deeply rooted in human needs for meaning and transcendence, and ultimately, more difficult to challenge or eliminate. When we walk through the ruins of ancient temples, read the fragmentary records of priestly activities, or contemplate the vast resources that ancient societies devoted to religious purposes, we are witnessing the physical traces of a form of power that shaped human civilization profoundly. The priests are long dead, their gods mostly forgotten, their rituals no longer performed. But the patterns they established, how religious authority relates to political power, how knowledge monopolies create influence, how economic resources sustain institutions, how meaning-making shapes societies. These patterns continue reverberating through human history. The ancient priests who controlled kings and empires left an inheritance that extends far beyond their particular civilizations, shaping how we understand power itself.